A few months ago I have promised you that I will be debunking and dunking on leftists, so here I am. A few years ago, in a debate that Vosh had with a capitalist, Vosh came up with a now very popular Coconut Island analogy in order to prove to his opponent that coercion can indeed exist in a capitalist voluntary interaction.
They would be willing to give you said coconuts if you throat their cock. Now, would you consider that to be a voluntary interaction? Is that a voluntary interaction?
The analogy goes something like this. You wake up on a shuttered island after a plane crash, and the only person besides you who has survived has gathered all the available food supply on an island, piled it all up, and declared it to be his private property that if you wish to have some of, you ought to suck on that BWC though. Now, this is not used as a feminist critique of the prostitution industry, nor is it a critique of monopolies, including in the form of the government that illuminates every market alternative that is otherwise provided in a healthy capitalist economy with antitrust laws. No. The primary purpose of this argument, at least by those who employ it online, including by Adam Something, is to take a shot at capitalism, also known as the root of all evil, even though Vosh's original point in that debate was about power imbalances which coerce people into signing voluntary exploitative contracts. So, in a sense, I will be responding both to Vosh, but also those who are taking him out of context. And because I am no libertarian fundamentalist, I will have to concede the argument that there is no exploitation under capitalism, and I will admit that coercion is absolutely a thing within voluntary transactions, yet I do find this analogy to be quite limiting, partially because Vosh's actual purpose for this argument is much worse than socialism good and capitalism bad, but I'll save that for the end of the video. What's important to know now is that coconut analogy exists within a vacuum that is cut off from the wider society, which is able to conduct regulations, pass laws, inflict a public or a legal judgment on the party that abuses its power, in addition to doing everything possible to make sure that there are alternatives. And I haven't even mentioned giving legal privileges to people who find themselves in life-threatening situations. Vosh's analogy, on the other hand, exists outside of our society and is underpinned by a weird understanding of human psychology, which in his point of view allows your only other potential ally in this situation to starve to death as opposed to cooperate and try to survive, which is how we evolved to behave in the first place. That is why in many places stealing food for survival is not criminalized. In fact, in an online poll asking whether we should treat all theft equally, even for those who steal in order to survive, an overwhelmingly 79% of respondents disagreed, while none had strongly agreed, which only reinforces the point that in extreme and life-threatening situations, people are making exceptions. But assuming a miracle or perhaps a bad omen had happened and that exchange offer wasn't yet proposed and humans are as evil as Vosh imagines them to be, a party without coconuts may offer the service of building a shelter, as opposed to doing a sexual favor, which is pointless in the proposed condition anyways. But unfortunately, people who think in terms of zero-sum games are not intelligent enough to imagine more than 2 or 3 possible scenarios, nor are they able to imagine an exchange that satisfies both parties equally. For them, it's always somebody loses and somebody wins. But remember how I told you that Vosh's actual purpose for this argument is much worse than you may recognize on the surface level. The truth is that Vosh's analogy doesn't operate within a false dilemma, to suck or to starve, even though it is masterfully constructed in such a way that you're only left with 2 choices, but in fact there's a third choice that you subconsciously knew about all along, even though Vosh had never uttered it in his original video. The actual solution in Vosh's mind that allows you to break out of this dilemma is to use violence in order to get what you want. Don't believe me? Well, here's the man speaking for himself.
The best thing you could do is to bludgeon them over the head and steal their coconuts. That would be an argument in favor of proletarian revolution. What you're essentially arguing is that if a necessary interaction is exploitative or coercive enough, you have the right to use violence to seize whatever commodities you need, whatever systems you need. in order to mitigate that threat, to eliminate that coercive element.
Thus, this analogy is nothing else than a well-masked leftist call to violence against an imagined injustice that supposedly doesn't allow them to exist. Perhaps the single worst part about false analogies is that people might want to use them in real life. That is to say, a mentally unstable leftist might find the idea of an entire group of people simply existing on their own to be life-threatening for them, even when they aren't saying anything. Many leftists would consider that to be an act of violence. And boy oh boy am I not speaking about what they think when this group of people were to open their mouths and say something that leftists might get uncomfortable hearing. A good recent example of justifying violence in supposedly life-threatening situations is the so-called transgenocide conspiracy theory, which argues that Republicans and conservatives, or as they call them Nazis, have conspired to Minecraft transgenders, and I wish I was kidding.
I think it's high time that the perpetrators of a potential genocide be referred to as what they actually are. This liberal hand-wringing has not brought Republicans over to us.
Okay, yeah,
they are evil.
They're
murderers, and I think it's okay to tell people that. If that makes them go out and buy guns and ammo and prepare for a day where they try to enact that genocide, then all better for it. Guns are already in this country. I would rather them be in the hands of victims than victors.
Consequently, just like it is okay to use violence in order to protect yourself from violence, which a genocide directly implies, you should Minecraft those Nazis for your own protection.
Remember during the Black Lives Matter rallies, there were like those Patriot Prayer dumbfucks rolling their, $60,000 trucks through like urban neighborhoods with a bunch of guys with guns in the pickup trucks. When that happens, I want people to be able to take shots at them from apartment windows.
Because as we already know, the transgenocide is already in its preliminary stage. In fact, let me quote you the man himself.
I'm a big advocate for defensive violence here. I do think we're in the preliminary stages of a genocide.
What?
This rhetoric has indirectly, and possibly even directly, has led to one of the deadliest school shootings in recent memory. Furthermore, a similar rhetoric not that long ago has contributed to a black supremacist killing police officers en masse because he thought that he lived under the heel of white supremacist police system, thereby justifying his own violent behavior. But it doesn't always have to resort to murder, because whenever it's not murder, it's looting, physically abusing, or robbing people. Once again, supposedly done in self-protection. In fact, we know another supposed self-protection excuse that very recently has motivated Vladimir Putin to invade a sovereign country. He was not left an option because of NATO's expansion and the so-called Russian genocide in eastern Ukraine, so his apologists say. While his own speech could be comparable to that of Hitler in 1930s, where he said that we had no choice but to invade. It's either or. And although Vaj, BLM, and Adam Something may say that they have nothing in common with people like Vladimir Putin, they nonetheless both weaponize the politics of perceived grievances, a victimhood mentality directed at those who committed the supposed or imagined injustices. If we were to go ahead with this emotional blackmail, where the abuser would exaggerate their circumstances to a life-threatening level, then logically it follows that we should pump our 12-year-old boys full of female hormones in case them or their school therapist say it's either you have a daughter or a dead son. But for the sake of the argument, let's imagine our society was run by incels and they would weaponize the very same over-the-top victimhood mentality for their own gains. It would then logically follow that it would be totally okay for chuds to demand for state-mandated girlfriends because they can't live without them.
Women can't live with them, can't live without them.
Words of wisdom, Lloyd. Words of wisdom.
In any event, the coconut analogy is only good for critiquing monopolies and things that were built on criminal actions. In other words, Vaj made the coincidental anarchist libertarian argument. And surprisingly, with that analogy, even Murray Rothbard would be fine with. By the way, I should note that I'm not endorsing his other delusions. At the end of the video, I want to say that we do live in a society which rewards leftist whining, such as the minimum wage not being at least $20 an hour is literal slavery, while not allowing puberty blockers for minors is another holocaust. So we need to approach all of these mind games within the broader social context in which they are being said. And the moment an analogy like this drops, which alludes to violence inside a ridiculous abstract framework that has no relation to reality but could nonetheless be transformed into a real-life scenario, your alarm bell should go off. That was all for today. Follow me on Twitter and subscribe to me on Substack if you haven't already. There I will be posting unique content that you will not see on YouTube.